claims from some parts of Turkey that either the U.S. is somehow responsible or that its protection of Mr. Gulen is somehow involved in this. So I've already seen some stuff on Twitter from prominent individuals suggesting this was a Gulenist plot.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that?
I've seen some of those claims as well, Brad. I mean, look, this just happened, literally, not even hours ago. And there's an investigation which is just now starting. And I'm certainly not going to, and I don't think it's helpful for anybody to prejudge the outcomes of this investigation. We also have to remember that there's a mourning family out there. There's a diplomat now who lay dead, and a family who is going through an incredibly tough time, as well as those who were hurt and their loved ones. So I think that's where we need to stay focused, not on needlessly pointing fingers here until the investigation has had a chance to work its way through. As for the United States, as I've said many, many times, we have, as we always have, continue to support the democratically elected government of Turkey, and any suggestion that the United States in any way, shape, or form would be responsible for this act of murder and assassination or any other related activity to the coup. And I'm not saying this one was. I'm just saying that it obviously flies in the face of facts.
And lastly, the Russians say they're going ahead with this tripartite meeting tomorrow. Has the U.S. reconsidered, or has the U.S. received any invitation to take part in any way, or has it asked to be part of this process in any?
No, as far as I know, this is, as you've described it, between Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and as we've always said, any solutions that can be arrived by any of the parties that can lead to a reduction in the bloodshed, to a cessation of hostilities, to humanitarian aid, and to a resumption of political talks is welcome, whether or not we're at the table.
You're not an active participant in this diplomatic instance, let's say?
No.
Okay.
Do you consider this assassination as a terror act?
I think that's for the investigators to determine. I have seen the press reporting, as you have, of some of the things shouted by the perpetrator, but we weren't there, and I think it's really important that we let investigators work through this. I certainly couldn't rule out terrorism as a motive or behind this. I wouldn't rule that out at all at this early stage, but I think it's really important that rather than jumping to conclusions, particularly those of us who aren't there and weren't involved, that we ought to let the investigators do their jobs.
Supposedly, the killer was one of the militant supporters, so he was shouting, "You die in Aleppo, and you die here." So I'm going to use influence to let these militants know that this kind of criminal acts are unacceptable.
Well, sir, I think in your question you're already making the assumption that that's in fact what's behind this, and it could very well be. I'm not ruling that out or in. It's not my place. We need to let the investigation run its course to figure out exactly what happened here, and I'm just not going to jump to conclusions. If it is an act of terrorism, and I'm not saying it is, but if it is, obviously, we have routinely and continue to condemn all acts of terrorism. We condemn this murder. We condemned it very openly, very strongly. You heard the Secretary say so himself. This assassination, I correct myself, this assassination. But I think it's really important to let the investigation work its way, okay?
What is the situation at the U.S. Embassy right now in Ankara? The State Department Diplomatic Security tweeted it was under lockdown. There's an advisory sent out to U.S. citizens to stay away from the area.
I'm not aware that the situation at the embassy has changed since they issued the lockdown and issued a message urging people to stay away from it. That was an act of prudence and obviously keeping safety foremost in mind. I don't have an update beyond that. But the embassy wasn't involved in this. It just is, as I understand it, very close.
Though, right?
Somebody told me it's within 100 yards or so.
100,
so
yeah.
that's pretty close, and I think that warrants the embassy issuing a security message. But I'm not aware that there's been any change to their status after they issued the lockdown.
And what are international guidelines?
Can I ask who you are?
Excuse me?
Who are you?
With Russian TV.
Okay.
TV channel Russia. What are international guidelines in terms of diplomat securities? Does U.S. ambassador to Turkey have armed bodyguards or like extensional security in this case?
Well, look, I think wherever we have ambassadors and consulate officials around the world, they have appropriate security. We never talk about the details of the force protection procedures and processes and resources that we apply in any country, anywhere around the world. We obviously take the safety and security of not only our personnel, but Americans abroad very, very seriously. And I think I'll leave it at that. Okay? Yeah.
Let me ask, the shooter is quoted as saying, "Don't forget Syria, don't forget Aleppo. You will not be safe as long as we are not safe." Is there any reaction to these words from the shooter?
I have seen the press reports of those comments, and only the press reports of those comments. As I said, the U.S. State Department is not ruling out the possibility that this is an act of terrorism. We would never do that. But I think we also need to let investigators do their work. It is still very much an active crime scene, and we're going to let that process proceed before making any conclusions. And matter of fact, it really isn't for us to make those conclusions. But certainly, without question, we would think that terrorism would need to be one thing investigated, one thing looked into, given the press reporting that we've seen about what his alleged comments were. But I don't think it's helpful for anybody to get ahead of this. I also think, if you don't mind me saying, that we all need to recognize that there's a family going through a very tough time today. This man was assassinated in cold blood. And I think we need to keep their sensitivities and their concerns and their grief in mind right now. And it doesn't do anybody any good to try to leap 2, 3, 10 steps ahead of where we are. There is a diplomat who was killed today. There's a family who's in grief, and obviously this is an assault, as the Secretary said, not just on this individual, but on the act of diplomacy itself. I mean, he was speaking at an art gallery. This is what, part of what diplomats do in terms of sharing and dialogue and culture. And I mean, there's an international system here that was also assaulted, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
Now, is the situation at the U.S. Embassy connected with the shooting? Is this like in response to the shooting, or is there a separate incident?
No, I mean, the order to lock down and the security message was done specifically because of the shooting at the art gallery. There is no other incident, no other threat at all. The embassy did exactly what they should have done given their proximity to the scene.
And will this enhance the possibility of cooperation between countries against terrorism?
I think, as we've said many times, the international community does share a common threat against terrorism. And to the degree that the international community, bilaterally or multilaterally, can improve cooperation on counterterrorism efforts, that's to the betterment of everybody, no matter where you live, no matter what country you call home. What will come as a result of this incident, I think we, again, need to wait to see the results of the investigation and see where it leads us. As I said, I don't think anybody can rule out the possibility that this is terrorism, but we can't get ahead of what is really only an hour or two old fresh start investigation.
Now, this city that the shooter reportedly invoked is a big point of disagreement between the United States and Russia, correct?
It's a big point of contention between Syria, Russia, Iran, and the rest of the international community.
Okay.
Ma'am.
Have we increased security or taken any further precautions for our own ambassadors in the area and other countries surrounding that?
Well, as again, I would say we don't talk about the specifics of force protection. We obviously take the protection of our embassy personnel very, very seriously all around the world. And you can imagine that in certain places and at certain times that security is adjusted to react to or to reflect whatever the security environment is there. I won't speculate, I won't talk in any detail about what, if any, changes there might be to our security posture in Ankara. I can just assure you and assure the American people that we take the safety and security of our ambassadors and our embassy personnel very, very seriously. If I could just mention, we also do takes seriously the safety and security of Americans that are overseas, whether they're on business or on travel for pleasure. That's why it was so important for our embassy to issue that security message to warn people to stay away because of their proximity to this event. So it's something we always look at, we always amend as needed, and we never ever talk about the details of that. Yeah.
UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura said he plans to convene peace talks in Geneva in February.
Yeah.
Does the U.S. have any comment or statement?
We've seen those comments, and if in fact it can be done in February, we would certainly welcome that. I think you heard the Secretary talk to this last week, that we want to see a return to political talks as soon as possible. So if in fact it can happen in early February, that would be very welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
Iraq, Mosul. Both the New York Times and Washington Post over the weekend reported that there are serious difficulties in liberation of Mosul, both in the slow pace of the operation and in the humanitarian situation. Do you think that you, or at least Baghdad, which had the lead, that the difficulties in Mosul were underestimated?
Well, first of all, I would commend the reporting in both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I mean, those are very thoughtful pieces about a very dynamic, very fluid, very challenging environment. And there's no question. I think everybody knew well in advance of the Mosul campaign kicking off that it was going to be difficult, and that there was going to be humanitarian needs on a major scale as a result of the campaign. You know, I remember being asked many months ago about, you know, why hasn't Mosul kicked off yet, and what's the delay, and why aren't you putting more effort into spurring Iraq to mount that campaign sooner? And back then we said, because it's going to be hard, and because there's a lot of planning that needs to go into it, not just pre-planning or even implementation, but thinking about post-liberation. And so there was a lot of that thought, and there was a lot of that planning, and there has been a lot of effort put into the humanitarian aspect of this. And just, if you don't mind, I'll walk through just a little bit of it. Now, as I say this, I also want to say right at the outset that we're mindful there's still work to be done. We're mindful that there are still internally displaced people, and that there are still needs that have to be met. I'm not at all suggesting that the reporting is inaccurate. We know that there are many people being pushed out because of the campaign there, and that they are, some of them, in desperate need. But there was a lot of thought given to this, and there has been a lot of effort applied to it. Since the 17th of October, UN and humanitarian partners have provided more than 130,000 people with USAID-funded relief kits, nearly 163,000. Nearly 164,000 people with household items, and approximately 185,000 people with 30-day food rations. Relief groups have also provided medical care to almost 50,000 people. Since the start of the operation, more than 100,000 have been provided shelter in camps or local communities. There continue to be spaces available, more than 40,000 spaces available for additional internally displaced people who we do anticipate now being in need as a result of the Mosul operations. On December 8th, just a little bit ago, USAID-funded UN partners, the World Food Program, UNICEF, UN Populations Fund, provided food, hygiene,